even though Beach Bottom is one of the most traveled trails in the Kamasaga area, in the Cohutta area rather, you can still see it gets in quite tight. And of course, if it was if it was wet, even if it's not raining, if it was wet, you get totally soaked. Not because of the rain, but because all this foliage is touching you. And there are places here like Rough Ridge and Hickory Ridge that I've recently been on that are so overgrown that you almost have to bushwhack. You basically use your trekking poles to spread the foliage as you walk because it's so thick and tons of vines and thorns. So I'm kind of surprised that such a common trail like Beach Bottom is even this starting to get overgrown. Ha! Glad I caught that on camera. Slippery rocks. I just got off of Beach Bottom Trail. I'm headed westbound on Jacks River Trail towards Jacks River Falls, which is the main attraction in the Cohutta Wilderness in terms of landscape or feature or whatever. This is a pretty well-used trail, but there are still spider webs everywhere. And I'm just about to do the calculation on how long it took me, because I think this is 3.9 miles. And I only hiked for an hour and 15 minutes, so that would be pretty fast. And it's possible there was a decent amount of downhill. It's nothing really strenuous. So maybe I got close to 4 miles an hour. That'd be cool. Well, that's the advantage of coming on a Monday. You get Jacks River Falls all to yourself. Upper pool, lower pool's right down there. Very refreshing. So we're here at Jacks River Falls. This is what's called the upper falls, I guess. There's this pool here, and actually the water level's fairly low, otherwise I couldn't stand on this. I've been here before where that's completely submerged, and we haven't had a lot of rain lately, at least at my house, which is not far from here, about an hour and a half's drive. And just see if I can show you the lower falls real quick for those interested. Yeah, there it is down there. Well, you can swim down there. I've not done that. We've been here, when we were down there, it was too cold. But yeah, it's not just one waterfall. Panther Creek Falls on the other side of the wilderness is sort of like a single waterfall, no pool, it just kind of falls into a creek. But yeah, this one is basically the total opposite. Jacks River Falls, the advantage to coming on a Monday, you have it all to yourself, which isn't that important to me, but to some it is. So I'm almost done with my solo trek here in the Cohutta Wilderness. This is a great example of where trekking poles are so useful. They'll help you get across streams and creeks more easily and more safely and without getting wet, keeping your shoes dry. So I cut my trip a little short in terms of mileage. I was going to do a Penitentiary Branch hemp top loop, but I didn't really come out here to rack up the miles. I actually came out here to do some praying and just some deep thinking, and so I didn't want to really push it. I wanted to have more quiet time and relaxed time and sitting time. So I cut it to just 16 miles down Beach Bottom, down Jacks River Trail, a little bit up Rice Camp, and then reversed the whole thing. So not much in the way of accomplishments, but one great benefit of being out here is just there's a peace. Your phone doesn't work. I almost didn't bring my phone, but I just thought that might be a touch unwise. But you have no service, and so far I'm like 15 and a half miles in. I'm just the car is just a quarter mile away or something, and I didn't see any people. And so just that solitude, which actually I am extremely uncomfortable with. I am a people person of people. It's tough for me. But one of the things that I want to be as a father is someone who does not pass down fears to their children, and someone who sets their children up to be without fear in as many areas as possible. And so it's a little spooky out here alone. It's not my favorite way to backpack, but this is now the second time doing it. Each time just one night each. Last time the conditions were far more dismal. It was rainy and cold and really spooky with tons of fog. The visibility was terrible. This time has been more pleasant, and just repeating something sort of reduces the anxiety and the fear. But what I have learned is that the best way to get over fears is to face them, not to run from them. And you should do that incrementally. You shouldn't just drop yourself off in the middle of Alaska when you're afraid of backpacking alone or something like that, but just baby steps. And you may never be the sort of person who prefers solitude over being with people. I doubt that I ever will. I think that if a friend wanted to go with me, I would always prefer that. But there's a big difference between something becoming your preference versus something becoming an option, and something losing its authority over your life in terms of fear. And as a father, you don't want to pass down those generational fears to your children. You want your children to fear the right things in this world. There's evil, there's wickedness, there's deception, there's destruction, but you don't want them to have misplaced fear on things like a bug in your hammock, or fantasies like in the middle of the night while backpacking, someone angry with a chainsaw is going to come cut you in half. So this is as much of an experience for me as it is for the future of my children. So anyway, I don't know how many of you will find all this interesting, listening to a guy who's going for a walk in the woods, but if you're interested in the Cohutta wilderness or wilderness areas in general, or backpacking alone in general, then maybe it's a slightly informational or instructional or encouraging. And if not, I would say let me know by giving it a thumbs down. And maybe you would like a guy, I think his YouTube channel name is Jupiter. He's a younger guy, maybe in his 30s. He's a thru hiker, ultralighter. He can be kind of interesting. He does a lot of nice music and intros, and there's a nice vibe and aura of his channel, which you probably won't find here. So go check him out. Have a good day, folks. So I've only been to 2 wilderness areas in the United States. Here, the Cohutta Wilderness, while in Tennessee, the Big Frog Wilderness area, and the Boundary Waters, north of Minnesota and Canada. And obviously we did a lot of canoeing there because it's a canoeing wilderness area, not a hiking wilderness area. But I just thought I'd mention a little bit about how wilderness areas differ from, say, a national park, or probably a state park for that matter. So wilderness areas were created after the national parks started getting created. People were a little bit concerned, I guess, that the national parks are being overdeveloped with buildings and bathrooms and restaurants, and they wanted to preserve land that was more or less undeveloped. And so I'm no historian, so you can debate me in the comments if I get something wrong, but I'm just telling you my understanding. So these wilderness areas were created, and basically there's no buildings on the grounds. There's no chainsaws allowed, so any maintenance work that's done has to be done with a handsaw. There's no electricity, and there's also no roads. So there's roads obviously getting you close to the wilderness area, but none in the wilderness area. And so it is a much less maintained, more raw environment. Now, the area that I'm walking on right now is one of the most popular in the whole wilderness area near Jacks River Falls. So this probably to your eyes doesn't look that underdeveloped. But as an example, this thing coming up, at some point this tree fell and no park rangers came in and made this new way. People just sort of, well, somebody came in and cut that. One of the volunteers probably. Because I've backpacked almost 200 miles here and I've never seen a park ranger. So things like this fall down and people just go around them. Whereas if this were to happen in a national park, that whole thing would be removed and the original trail would be restored. And so in a very small way, these trails are changing because the length of them is changing, because you have to walk around things and the exact markings on the GPS change because you have to walk around things. And that, a lot of people like that, myself included. Don't get me wrong, I love the national parks and I love the trails, but I don't like feeling like I'm walking on a dirt sidewalk. You know, I want there to be roots in my way. I want there to be a variance in the terrain. I want there to be things that you got to climb over and climb under. To me, that makes it feel a little bit more adventurous than just walking through your neighborhood, you know? So now, the downside, in my opinion, with that is that it can vary greatly. So there are two trails here, one called Rough Ridge and one called Hickory Ridge. They are sort of the steepest of the trails, and they're the most inland and the furthest away from parking. And so the volunteers who come and take care of these trails don't get there very often. And there's also no horseback allowed up there. So those trails are almost impassable. I was on Hickory Ridge last year. It was so mentally and emotionally despairing because you'd use your trekking poles to push back basically barbed wire thorns, and there was spider webs galore. That was more about the season than the maintenance. Just super overgrown. And then you'd come across blowdowns where a tree had blown down over the trail and you were probably the first or maybe the 10th person to ever pass it. And so it was easy to lose the trail, and it was easy to get your bag snagged as you're trying to go over under, plus all those vines that were already on the flat bits were still there. So the issue I see, or my complaint, if you will, in wilderness areas is not that the condition of the trail is generally more rough. It's that sometimes it's like this, which is almost at like the national park trail level, unmissable, well established, nothing in your way. And then it can shift to just, to the point where you almost need a machete. And so you have this wild variance, and there's not really any standard of where you're going to find it or when you're going to find it. And so you have to be ready for that variance. So when you're planning your route of how many miles you'll do a day at, 3 miles an hour or whatever you do, you have to hold those plans very loosely because you don't know how fast your speed will be in the bushwhacking areas. And specifically here in the Cohutta wilderness, there are not that many loops that you can create where you go north to south and back again. There's quite a lot of out and backs, but there aren't a lot of good loops. There was a trail here called Sugar Cove that used to help with loops, but it basically got destroyed in a storm and they decided not to rebuild it. So your ability to stay flexible is required. You have to, because you don't know what the trails are going to be like, but you don't have that many options for plan B or C if your planned loop fails. So I don't know if that helps anybody or answers any questions. But wilderness areas are very cool. I'm on about my 10th mile right now. Between yesterday and today, I've not seen a single person. I've had it all to myself. And granted, it is Tuesday, but I've been here on the weekends. And the less popular areas are really empty. And the people you meet often, there's a couple weirdos out there, but a lot of time the people you meet are pretty interesting because they're also out there doing something a little bit crazy. So there's a lot of freedom out here. There are not designated campsites that you have to stay in. There's no fee. There's no parking fee. I mean, the whole thing's just free, and it feels much more raw and unregulated and open for adventure, much more so than the trail in a national park or something like that. So we're coming up on Jack River Falls here. Thought maybe I'd keep the camera rolling so you can see the approach. I'm coming from the Rice Camp direction, where I slept last night. And last night was my first night sleeping in my new 1 ounce Hyper D self-made hammock. There's no mosquito netting on that, and that was a bit of a disappointment. There was more bugs than I thought they'd be last night. I wasn't expecting that compared to previous seasons that I've been here. I'm here a little bit earlier, so I had some bugs in the hammock with me, sort of nibbling on my face, creeping me out. So that was not ideal. I wasn't happy about that. I had I don't know what the official name is. I think we call them leaf bugs. They kind of look like a big green grasshopper, but the side of their wings have an incredible leaf-like pattern. I want to say it's a katydid, but I'm not sure on that. Anyhow, I had one of those land on the hammock behind my head, and I heard the thump. And I was like, man, what the heck was that? It sounded like a squirrel just ran into my hammock. Of course, it had reverberated. So a relatively small animal, like an insect, was able to make a relatively large noise. Anyway, I turned around. It was like 3 or 4 inches from my head. I swatted it out of there. And I will say, those are the kind of things, like when those things happen in isolation, like if you're just at your house sitting in a lawn chair and a bug flies by you, it's kind of no big deal. But when you're out here and you're alone and you're a little creeped out and maybe you're a little cold, or maybe you're a little worried if the rain fly that you put over your hammock is going to shield you from the rain that you weren't expecting to come, which did come last night, you know, and when you add all those things together, all of a sudden there's just like an unnervousness. Like there's just this creepiness of having like bugs in your hammock with you, whether they're dangerous bugs or benign bugs, big or small. It's like creepy, you know, and so that's part of the reason I'm out here. It's because I want to get used to that level of creepiness. I don't want to be disturbed by something that I ought not to be disturbed by. I want to be afraid of the real things in life, not silly things. All right, so there's the Lower Falls area. Jack's River Falls is not just like one waterfall, it's a long series of many. The other named waterfall in the park, Panther Creek, is the opposite. It's just like one drop. So there she is, Jack's River Falls. I'm gonna go sit down right around there, have my morning coffee and a swim. See you, folks.